Okay, we're back. We didn't really go away, did we? But we're here with Mark, and Mark's going to talk to us about fails, the common fails that we see in the context of security. So, from the point of view of a responder, so Mark, when you're ready, over to you, mate.
Thanks very much, Mike. Hi everyone, this is Shocking Tales of Common Fails, a Responder's View. Oh, hang on. Sorry, good start. Hi everyone, I'm Mark. I'm Binary Sleeper on Twitter. Started in IT years ago, back in the days before there was a Windows Start button, even before that, then moved on into information security. Currently, I do some incident response and investigation stuff, amongst other things. I tend to use the term information security as it's a broader church than the commonly used cybersecurity, because it's an old enough one that cyber means something a bit filthy, and two, it doesn't cover everything. I'm interested in wherever information goes. So filing cabinets, people talking and things like that. So what I'll be gabbling about today, some common issues that hinder incident response and some common issues that cause or exacerbate incidents. I'll be drawing mainly from my own experiences as a responder, and also some observations on sort of public incidents as well. But to be clear, this is not a definitive guide, just things that have I've encountered along the way and have made enough of an impact on me to think, I should mention it. What I won't be gabbling about is how to fix this stuff. Well, maybe a bit where it's obvious, but every organisation is different. They have different resources and requirements. So the mileage may vary. Right, first off, fails part one, logging. Logs are not just for starship captains. First off, what is logging? Logging at its most fundamental is recording, recording events that have occurred in the format that allows later review. It's useful to tell us what is happening and has happened on a system. It's pretty fundamental to, for troubleshooting, investigation, and audit purposes. So first one, the biggie. The logs aren't turned on. It's not going to help you with anything. Generally, the first part of an incident investigation, we want to have a look at the logs to ascertain what has occurred. Obviously, if there are no logs, it becomes very difficult, and it will always leave a large number of uncomfortable questions going unanswered and can make effective remediation pretty difficult. Many assume that logging is enabled by default and often don't think to check. So, do you know if it's on? And are you really sure? It's not suitable for there is no evidence of a response. If you haven't got your logs turned on, say, well, there is no evidence of a breach, there's no evidence of data exfiltration, you're not going to get anywhere. Because people will prod and you'll be found wanting. It's a bit like the old see no evil monkey. Anyway, a common sort of example of this logging not turned on problem is with older Office 365 estates, which do not have audit logging turned on by default. Often when a breach is detected, usually at the phishing propagation stage or when a customer or supplier phones up to inquire about where their funds have gone, you'll have no idea when the breach started, what data was accessed, think of things like OneDrive and SharePoint, as well as the email, or what actions the attacker took and may still be taking. So it's a fundamental thing. Have your logs on. Next, often the logs aren't fit for purpose. Assuming that we've got logging turned on, the next most common failure is that logs do not record what is required for the investigation. And whatever the nature of the investigation is, it could be for security breach, it could be for audit, it could be for troubleshooting. Make sure your logs are fit for purpose. And a log may have more than one purpose. So check with all the stakeholders. An investigation will generally require information to help answer the 5 W's and 1 H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Next, do the logs record meaningful information? Do they have meaningful usernames? They got some source addresses? Do they tell you what occurred, what data was accessed, what functions were used? Can you tell what someone did from your logs? Next point, can you share your logs with third parties? Often logs can contain sensitive information. So if you have it in debug mode, you might be dumping passwords, credit card details in there. other PII and things like that. You may have people's names or document names in there which are being logged, and you can't share it with third parties because it could be another technical breach. So if you've got this type of stuff, make sure you've got a way to clean or sanitize your logs. NDAs will get you so far, but sometimes you're just not allowed to move the stuff on. It can hamper analysis by third parties, especially in an incident. Next, we've got insufficient coverage. You've got insufficient retention. It's got to cover the period of the incident. Now, this is a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. You don't know how long your incident is. So basically, look at industry standards and also your compliance requirements for sort of guidance on how long you should be keeping logs. They don't need to be necessarily readily accessible online, but they just have to be there, accessible at some point. Another problem and fail is log rolling. Some logs are set to roll after a certain number of events or a certain amount of time, and it's going to overwrite potentially crucial information. A lot of firewalls do this in default. They don't have a lot of storage on board, and they will, roll after 7 days or after a certain number of events. And this can also be abused by attackers because they can generate a number of spurious events to basically roll the log and cover their tracks. Next, we've got missing systems, where not all systems are covered. For example, you might not be logging bandwidth usage, so you can't tell, what an attacker exfiltrated, how much data did they slurp. You might not be recording access to certain other systems. Also got missing systems where which are part of the information chain. So, for example, you look at your OWA logs. Your OWA Outlook Web Access for the uninitiated is sitting behind a load balancer, and it will record the IP address of the load balancer. That's no good for an investigation. So you also want to be able to correlate that with the load balancer's logs to see the actual true IP address behind it. And again, for DHCP leases, if you are recording IP addresses which are given out by DHCP lease internally, do you know who or what system had that IP address at that time? So you need to make sure that the whole information chain is present. Next, the log's not secured. If an attacker's had sort of root access or full access to a system, there's a big possibility that the log's going to be tampered with. That's always very worrying because if they have been tampered with, what they try to hide. And again, they can be cleared or reset. Now, a lot of this stuff is good OPSEC. You should always, cover your tracks as an attacker. A lot of attackers don't seem to bother, but when they do, it leaves that horrible question: what are they trying to hide? Makes it difficult to see what they did, and therefore it's very difficult to remediate against and also answer certain questions. So, next, third-party system logs. The continued growth of cloud-provided services and organizations are using. There's loads of services and online applications. You combine this with the ever-present bugbear of password reuse. If you find a user's credentials being compromised, there's concern that the attacker may have used those credentials elsewhere in a password stuffing or credential stuffing or password spraying attack against other well-known services, that you might have accounts on. So therefore, you've got to check whether these third-party logins have occurred. We've come across certain systems with woefully inadequate logging or audit trails. Just a username and the time it logged on, no source IP address, no systems access, no functions used, whether how long they were in there for, and things like that. So make sure they meet your logging requirements. Figure out what the limits are. Do they only log 25,000 events? Do they have retention periods? Do they roll them after a week or only keep them for 3 months? Do they have relevant and meaningful information? What are their turnaround times and escalation points? As a third party, you ask them for the logs. You hope they're going to get them to you quickly because you're in the middle of an incident. Time is a factor. They've got other priorities. Do you have escalation points if they're failing to do it? And are they contractually obliged to provide this information? They might turn around and say, no, it'll cost us time and money, we're not doing it. So make sure you've got these things in place. Should ideally be sort of dealt with at the procurement stage, yeah, and detailed in contract wording. Don't just take someone's word and a handshake for it. Mentioned earlier that there'll be some uncomfortable questions that you would have trouble answering. These are them here. You know, basically, if you've had a breach or an incident, people want to know how long you were breached for, what data was breached, what data was exfiltrated, who by. And admittedly, this is very difficult to know, but having at least some clue would be, go some way to making people happier that at least you're trying to find out or can find out. And also, are you now secure? If you don't know what happened, how can you, say you're now secure against it? So, well, part 2, alerts, alerting and monitoring. Setting up alerting helps identify things that should be investigated and or sort of dealt with. So if a system is set to generate them, make sure they are monitored. And also, if you're generating alerts, make sure that they are on point. You don't want too many alerts, too vague alerts. You don't want to overload the people having to deal with them. You get alert fatigue and they ignore it. And you get some conversations with them saying, well, I see you have this alert here. And they go, oh, we're always getting that. Oh, well, it's just another alert. That's really something you don't want to be subject to. Finally, make sure there are clear lines of authority. If someone is receiving alerts, make sure they feel empowered to either act upon them or know who to contact to escalate it to. You don't want someone there saying, oh, I think the CEO's email account is breached. Should I disable it or not? You don't want them humming and ahhing. You want them to feel comfortable to shut that thing down right now, and then go onwards from there. And you don't also want to be the organisation where an alert comes in Friday at quitting time, and they think I'll deal with it on Monday, and over the weekend there's a third ventilation device interface, and you've got a whole world of pain coming in on Monday morning. A lot of attackers plan their activities for time periods that they don't think will be monitored. First, part 3, missing basic controls. There's a lot of basic controls in security. They're no particular mystery. They're sometimes hard to do, but they should be done. So first off, lack of appropriate access controls. You should have things like 2FA and MFA on publicly accessible services. You get a lot of organizations with out-of-date password policies. They make horribly complex passwords. You've got to change them very often. It's no longer, the guidance, and it hasn't been that for a while. You want to, long passwords people can remember, and they change them when they feel they should. Don't keep forcing them, because it leads them to bad habits. We had a case where the breach was caused by someone who managed to use the same password that was in the LinkedIn breach. They had basically gone through the several hundred, cannot use the last several hundred passwords over the 7+ years, and rotated back to one they'd used that was in the breach. Attackers were in. I suspect that's the case in more than one occurrence, but kudos to the internal team who figured that out, and to the user being honest about it. Next, poor patching practices. Patching is complex, be fraught with dangers if you've got unstable systems, but it's an effective control and it's done properly. These days, the time from CVE publication to active exploitation seems to be shortening. So designing systems that are rapidly patchable along with all the testing requirements is a must these days. And even when a patch is released months before, organizations have failed to patch. CVE 2019-11510, the Pulse Secure VPN sort of comes to mind in this one. Months later, people were being taken out. Next, poor network segmentation. Good network segmentation can hinder lateral movement of an attacker and also of malware. It also helps you secure resources more easily. This is especially an issue if you've got a card holder data environment for PCI, DSS. Exposed insecure services. The main one that I encounter is RDP, and it's not just small organizations, having it there for their accountant to come in and do their books once a month. It's also large organizations who, who think we know better. It's definitely one of the more prevalent first access points in the ransomware cases I encounter. Basically, if a service is insecure, stick it behind a VPN, preferably one that's patched, obviously. Secure backups, off-site or logically separate. Talented ransomware actors, they want one thing, they want your money. So they're going to do everything in their power to force you into a position where the only option is to pay them the ransom to get your data back. So they'll target key systems and hunt for your backups, and they'll burn them to the ground if they can. NAS boxes are a popular favorite. They encrypt the backups on the NAS boxes, and then they reset them to factory defaults. They're making it very difficult to recover your data, and they want you to pay. So basically, having backups an attacker in the network can't reach is a good thing. Fails part 4, historical nasties. Old data lurking in the depths. If you haven't got a good sort of data life cycle, people don't know what to do with the data. Good data life cycle should dictate how you store, transmit, and process data, how long you should keep it for, and finally how you should dispose of it. Lots of other things it should have as well, like source, consent, owner, etc. But I'd say for the first bits as a starter. If the life cycle is poorly documented, no one actually adheres to it, even if it exists. The data has a habit of leaking and spreading to where it should not. So you get things like old copies which are untracked. People take a copy somewhere just for a quick copy, or either to a local device because they just can do something just in case. It can lurk in old file shares. People migrate file servers. Email servers are another place where this data can lurk. Case management systems often have no way of cleaning out old data beyond its retention period. Email servers are a particular bugbear. You've got the CC problem. People don't know what they've got in their mailboxes. I had a case where someone was CC'd in, and there was an attachment of a spreadsheet which had some calculations of various things. Someone had dumped an export from a database with users, passwords, loads of their PII into a sheet, and then ran some calcs off that. And the thing was, none of that PII or sensitive data was actually necessary for the calcs. So this thing went round to a number of people, and most of them wouldn't have actually been aware that this data was sitting in their mailbox. So if you think people are clearing out their mail from sensitive data, chances are they're not. They probably don't know what they've got. There are also lots of other places it can be, unsecured cloud storage, S3 buckets and things like that, personal devices. Data moves about. Old systems, hidden out of sight. You've got abandoned IT systems and unsupported systems. These days, before a first incident call, we'll tend to do a quick bit of OSINT reconnaissance, looking at an organization's emails, some setups, and what else they've got sort of published on the internet. And I often find systems that they've completely forgotten about or unaware of, that they thought were decommissioned. And this is particularly prevalent with things like on-premise Exchange, where they've moved to Exchange in the cloud. They've got old machines, sitting there, probably, still got copies of mailboxes on it. These systems can hold old copies of data, and also can, might not be maintained because no one's aware of them, and therefore they become particularly vulnerable. They might be an entry point into your network. So it's always good to do a little recon on your exterior. Unsupported systems are particularly juicy targets, as not only are they likely to be vulnerable, but they're also indicators of an organization's security posture, and therefore might make an attacker more curious to dig about a bit and see what else they might find of interest. All color hats go on showed in safaris. Fails part 5, organizational issues. Decision making, big one. The decision makers need to be available. They shouldn't be out of contact or going on a plane journey for several hours mid-incident. You want them to be there to make decisions quickly in a timely fashion. Slow decision-making processes. Often you find that sometimes you've got to put a decision to a committee or a board or something like that, or through a legal process. Make sure that those decision-making bodies have got a fast-track process, so you can get things done, in a timely fashion. Slow engagement processes. If you need to engage with third parties, make sure you can do it quickly. Know what needs to be done in terms of contracts, NDAs, payments. Make sure all the right people are lined up. Money for incident response. It can cost you sometimes. So make sure you've got someone with executive spending power. I used to make a policy of knowing who had company credit cards, so I could always go and find someone to mug in an emergency. If you've got insurance, make sure you know what your coverage is. Don't find out at the incident and try and figure out are you covered or not. You should know this stuff beforehand. Know what services are available to you, what you can do, what the limits of your cover are, who the contacts are, etc. And important thing, if you've got an excess, make sure everyone's happy that you're going to be eating into access when you activate your insurance policy. Don't be dithering about deciding whether is it sufficient. Have that decided beforehand. You should know what your limits are before you go into this type of stuff. Next, availability of key personnel. Make sure your key personnel are available. If they're not there, you could be stuffed. Know who they are. Not be gabbling about trying to find out who deals with that. It should be clear, but in part of your incident response plans, who the key people are. And it does help to make sure that people are aware of each other. If they don't know each other personally, at least they know who the other people are. Makes for a smoother incidents room, as it were. Personnel can be, the key personnel can be third parties. Again, make sure that they are, contractually obliged and you know what you're dealing with. And the other thing is with key personnel, make sure you've got alternates. People go on holiday, people get sick. Make sure there's cover. And of course, make sure you can contact them. Make sure you maintain contact details, emergency contact details. Have protocols for when people are going to be out of contact, so alternates can be activated. It's a bit of a pain to do, but makes life a lot easier when things hit the fan. Contractual stuff. Make sure your key personnel are available for emergencies. They might have other things outside work that they will deem more important. They might have childcare issues. They might have to look after someone else. You can't expect them necessarily to drop everything and come to the aid of the company. If there are people who are likely to have issues with that, identify them early and make sure you can figure out some way around it. Offer someone to pick taxi to go and pick up their kids from school, or alternate care for their people who need to be cared for. Don't just assume that they'll drop everything. Third parties, if you're dealing with third parties, don't assume that they're going to do all the stuff for incident response for free. It might not be in the contract, and they might say this is going to cost you extra. Be prepared for that. Third parties, there could also be a conflict of interest. If someone's managing a service, it gets breached. Are you sure you want only them investigating it? They may be covering stuff up. And again, if you need to make an insurance claim or something like that, it could be tricky if the conflict of interests aren't dealt with correctly. Third party, again, response times. Are they going to dance to your cadence? You'll be wanting to do things quickly. They'll have their own requirements, their own other work to do. So make sure again you've got something like an SLA in place to make sure they respond in times of incident. Data protection and GDPR. Not processing data in insane ways. Come across people scanning sensitive documents into cloud-based email systems. Don't do it. Doesn't need to be there. Transmitting data in unsecured ways. Still people out there using FTP. Really not good. Sharing too much information with third parties. You might need to send a marketing list to someone. Doesn't need to have the full database dump out there. Again, like my CC email example earlier, too much information was in the spreadsheet, didn't need to be there. And again, there was a recent incident with Virgin Media where some stuff was sent to a marketing company and there was loads of extraneous information that didn't need to be there. So make sure you clean that stuff before you send it out. Payment processes, fraud, big thing. Criminals want money. They're pretty good at getting it. So common way is sort of payment interception to get in the middle of a transaction and change the details. They'll either fiddle with their invoice or they'll just send another email saying, oh, that bank account is currently under audit, it's frozen. Can you send it to this bank account instead? Lots of ways of doing it. Basically, go and check through another medium that is the person you think you're talking to, and that the details have changed. Another one is separation of payment duties. Same person should not be able to raise a payment and authorize a payment. You want to have some sort of dual control there. Solves a lot of ills. Security disclosure contact. She's going to have a proper channel to report security issues. Don't want people scrabbling around to find out who do I talk to. I found a security issue. don't want to make it too hard for people to report security issues, because they might just not bother in the end, and you will have a breach later when someone else finds it and is not so kind. Also, make sure there are processes in place to deal with reported issues. Make sure that they're verified and dealt with correctly, and in a sort of a sane and professional manner. Don't treat them as service issues, because otherwise they might not get the sort of security expertise that they need. I mean, imagine having a breach where someone announces publicly that they told you about the vulnerability months earlier and you did nothing. Regulatory authorities, customers, and press can all take quite an interest. Lack of skills, lack of key skills for systems involved in incidents. Sometimes people get systems in and they don't have the skills internally, or the skills migrate outwards. So make sure you've got that covered. Make sure you're recording who can work on these systems. Again, key person reliance. Make sure if you've got someone, only one person with these skills, make sure there's an alternate who can at least do what's needed in an incident. Fails part 6, communications and PR. Notifications, not controlling the message. Don't spook or panic people. Don't leave unanswered questions that could easily be answered in the message. Otherwise, you get a load of inquiries that you just don't need at a busy time. Lack of preparation. Make sure you've got mechanisms to identify who should be notified, how to send and measure responses, and deal with inquiries. Make sure you've got resources for this. You might need to bring in an outside call center and things like that. Make sure you've got an idea of how you're going to deal with a notification thing. Poor comms, unclear messaging, making unsupported statements, using stock phrases. We take your security seriously. Military grade, unhackable, advanced attack. All these things that most of us look at and say, BS. Right. Summary thoughts. No organisation is perfect. There are a lot of things to do and improve, but limited resources. Prioritise your risks. Be realistic. Try threat modelling. Think what can go wrong. Plan scenarios for it. Ensure the stakeholders are aware and can assign resource, or at least accept the risk. And identify where the buck stops. Make sure you know who's accountable and responsible for various things. And run simulation exercises. They don't need to be complex, but they help you sort of iron out any kinks in your process and get everyone into the right frame of mind. No plan survives first contact. And the other thing is, things cost money. Plan for it. Things have got obsolescence. In 5 years, an OS is going to go out, so you want to be replacing it in 3 years. Budget for that. Don't say, "Oh, we haven't got money." That's just poor planning. Thank you for listening, everyone. Big shout out and kudos to the mentors. You were all awesome. Sam, Claire, James, Zoe, Dave, mate, you are all very, very awesome and very helpful. Nikos and Juan for the Zoom and PowerPoint tips. Thank you. Thank you to the goons as well, and to the beer farmers and all those who made this happen.
Brilliant, Mark. Thank you very much. Excellent. A lot of detail in there, and I think people will watch back this talk, certainly from an organizational point of view, and learn a lot of stuff. So really super cool. I've got a question for you.
Shoot.
Back to your comment around breaches. So in your experience, what would you think would be a typical amount of effort applied to trying to find out who done it in a breach versus fixing or forward fixing the problem and dealing with the outcome, or dealing with the fallout of it?
First, you see where it sort of takes you, but generally, you'll pretty much hit a dead end behind VPNs and other sort of forms of proxies, like residential proxies and things like that. But it can give you a little bit of an insight to what technologies they're using. If they're using residential proxies, they're probably slightly more advanced. They're trying to fly below the radar. If they're using VPNs that are associated with free VPN people, they're probably not so well funded. You got a lot of these free VPNs you can use. Tor proxies, are they coming out from that? But again, once you sort of hit that wall, a commercial investigation is not really going to make any headway against that. You need law enforcement clout. So yeah, that's about as far as you can go, but you should at least look to see. You never know. Could be some idiot from their home saying they might have had an OPSEC fail, and you can say, it is there. You might get lucky, and sometimes an OPSEC fail is something that happens, and the attackers reveal themselves. It's rare, but you can only go that so far.
Okay, great answer. Thank you for that. Again, really good talk. Excellent. Thanks very much, Mark. We really appreciate your time.